Hello everyone, this is your friend and I am back with a new fanfic. The fanfic title is What if a reincarnated girl became Sasuke's twin sister and saved the Uchiha clan? I hope you enjoy this fanfic, and if you enjoy this, so don't forget to subscribe my channel. Now let's start the fanfic. I try very hard to always write with maximum amount of research into the universe and into what I'll be writing, and if there are canon power scaling inconsistencies, feel free to always message me. I welcome all criticisms with joy because that means I can make my universe even more accurate. I also try to keep everyone in character as much as possible, but if you feel I wrote some people OOC, please also tell me. Lastly, my OC is a female twin sister of Sasuke. I've decided on her name since 2007, but sadly her name is also taken by a major character in Boruto. I've decided not to change her name because it is the name that I grew up with in my mind, but I hope it won't be a deal breaker for you who are reading this FIC right now. I've also filled in a lot of the holes in the original Naruto universe with my own ideas, which hopefully still fit in nicely to the story and are believable to be canon. I hope you will enjoy reading this FIC as much as I enjoyed writing it. It was a complete out-of-body experience. In her past life, considering how completely shitty it was, she always thought that she wanted to die. In fact, the night it happened, she was seriously considering death. Standing on top of the bridge, traffic going strong underneath her, the only thing keeping her back was the thought of her mother wanting her to live. But alas, before she made the choice, it happened. It was surreal, to say the least, when she saw herself on top of that bridge as if watching from the point of view of a god in the sky. How her soul was just gone, and her body fell without control. And she looked away the moment the collision happened. Though she felt nothing, and for a moment she was stuck in some sort of limbo of a void. The next thing she knew, it was like her soul was forcibly torn out of the void, into something that was tangible this time. And then came that awful, terrible feeling. Itachi knew that his mother had always wanted him to have a sister. Mom, I want an Otudo. An Otudo, Itachi-kun. But don't you think an Imoudo would be cute, too? He had frowned when his mother had said this in that amicable manner of hers. He wanted a little brother to play with and train with. Yes, a little sister would be cute, but it would also be a burden because she would need extra protection. His primal male and big brother instinct would want to protect a little sister more from this horrible world. And he would not, in good conscience, voluntarily watch the girl he raises and calls Imoudo getting beat up and torn apart by their way of life. So yes, Itachi knew that his mother had always wanted him to have a sister, but that didn't mean that he had to want it, too. The night they were born, Itachi was woken up by the sound of his mother shouting. In her full 9 months pregnancy she had slipped and fell in the bathroom, and all hell proceeded to break loose. It was the first time he saw his father this worried, and he ran as fast as his little feet could carry behind the group of Uchihas escorting his parents to a predetermined VIP ward in the Konoha hospital. He saw Sasuke first, and it was the happiest he had ever felt in his life. He wanted to hold him, kiss him, love him, until he heard his mother still screaming even after his father took Sasuke back inside. Father, he tried to call when his father warily tried to rush back to his mother. What's going on? Yono-sensei made a wrong diagnosis, she's having twins. And with that brief explanation the door was shut back close on his face. Then he didn't know how to react. Twins were a sign of luck, one of his grand-aunts had said, but he didn't know how this could be counted as luck as he stood there helpless and waiting. It was another hour more before one of the medic nin came out and explained to him and the rest of his relatives waiting outside of the operating ward that there was a complication with the second baby. Again the medic nin went back inside after the sentence. I'm sure they're okay, Itachi-kun, his uncle tried to reassure him, but even at 5-year-old he could see that his uncle and the rest of the clan were getting worried. He only nodded, and he paced outside the door as the dread inside him grew bigger and the whispers from the elders grew louder. It was already past midnight, and about 2 hours had passed after Sasuke was born. Itachi was getting paranoid. Was his mother okay? Was the other baby okay? His other brother? Then before he could blow up from nervousness and break into the operating room, his father and the rest of the medical team emerged with a healthy newborn in his father's arms. Kami-sama, was the first word his granduncle said in awe as he looked at the baby. It's a girl. And that, apparently, was a cause for celebration as the rest of the clan broke into gasps and cheers and laughters. It was in that moment Itachi remembered something from the clan history books. She was the first girl to be born into the head family in more than 10 generations. Not another brother, he thought, this was a sister. He had a little sister. Mitsuki, because that day in the throng of summer the full moon came out as early as 4 p.m. She looked exactly like Sasuke in this instance, but she had to have his eyes, Itachi's exact eyes, with the eyelashes and all. She was this beautiful, mystical being, but, deep inside, Itachi thought, something was terribly wrong with her. Because Mitsuki would not stop crying. From the moment she was born, to the moment the nurses handed her back to his father, and then his mother as the rest of the clan came in to check on Makoto, who was thankfully healthy, and throughout the night Sasuke was fast asleep, but Mitsuki did not stop crying. Is something wrong with her, sensei? His mother asked worriedly, at 4:30 in the morning just after they moved Sasuke into the newborn ward. It was already more than 3 hours after she was born. The rest of his clan already went back home to the compound to prepare for the big celebration for the newborn twins tomorrow. His mother still kept his sister in her arms, tiredly trying to get her to calm down. His father was standing still, looking at the clipboard that contained the baby's data, but otherwise said nothing. The doctor in charge of his mother's labor that night frowned, his hand still glowing green on Mitsuki's head with cool, soothing chakra. This is unusual. It might have something to do with the thing that made it hard to deliver her. Uchiha-sama, may I? His mother passed his sister carefully to Yono-sensei, and the man looked at her. Itachi followed him closely from behind as he placed her, still crying, on the crib in the room. The doctor's hand glowed green once again as it probed her tummy this time. Then Itachi's focus was broken as his baby sister screamed, a sound so terrible he didn't know a newborn could make. The doctor recoiled in surprise, but what surprised Itachi was the way he himself moved towards his sister, as if on instinct, and for the first time in his life, he touched her. It was small, and he did it because her scream shocked something deep and primal within him to do something, so he was immediately on her, sending calming chakra onto her hand, her head, everywhere he could. Then, to everyone's surprise, she stopped crying. The medic Nin blinked, looking at his mother and father. I felt something, not quite right with her chakra coil. What is it? He could hear the impatience in his father's voice. But the doctor only shook his head. I think it's best if we observe it first for a few days. She needs rest too, so does her mother, he said, looking at Makoto, who was almost falling asleep from her position on the bed. It would be unwise to wake her up now that she's stopped crying. And so his father reluctantly agreed, but Itachi could not keep his eyes and hands away from his sister. The way her small little fingers curled around one of his tightly, and the way she calmed down and finally breathed evenly with his chakra humming next to hers. So he stayed by her side the rest of that night. We named him after your father, Sarutobi-sama, his father had said proudly to Lord Third the morning after they were born. And the elderly former Hokage nodded with a smile as he took his baby brother gently and cooed him. Lord Fourth and his wife, however, were more interested in his baby sister, and Itachi had to stop himself from snapping at them not to touch her, because it took an entire night for Mitsuki to stop crying, and he was the only one who could get her to stop crying, and he wanted his sister uninterrupted rest. Thankfully the crowd left before she woke up again. They stayed in the hospital for another 3 days, postponing the celebration the clan had prepared, but the news traveled within the first sunrise after their birth. Everyone was pleasantly surprised. The all-males head family tradition had finally been broken. The kids will grow up strong, but she would be expected to be a kunoichi, too, Fugaku. Itachi thought it would be cool if his sister also became a ninja. She might even develop the Sharingan, but he wasn't sure that he wanted this baby girl, his Imouto, to experience the pain of loss associated with the awakening of the Sharingan, because he thought about it and shuddered. That was when he realized that he hadn't wanted a sister, but that didn't prevent him from falling in love anyway, and he fell in love with her and fell in love hard. She would need protection and he would give it to her, give hell to whoever would dare give her paper cut. It also didn't help that he seemed to be the only one who could hold her without her crying. It made him feel as though she was as attached to him as he was to her. So in those 3 days were the days he finally realized that perhaps he had wanted her as much as he had wanted Sasuke. There were 3 things she noticed the moment she understood that she had been forcibly shoved into this tiny body that was now hers. 1. Was that though she felt her body lacking any sort of control, she knew that she had a tangible body. She felt a semblance of a feeling of arms, of moving her legs, the fingers on her hands. Though why her body felt so weak and her senses felt so dark and overwhelming at the same time, she didn't know. 2. She realized that she remembered everything. Everything from her life before, up to the point that she fell off that bridge, she still had perfect recollection of. Though those things now felt like some sort of a very long vivid dream, and this time it felt like she was awake for the first time. And 3. Everything hurt. It was like her body was in a constant overload. All around her she felt uncomfortable, even from inside her own body she felt uncomfortable and itchy, and the only response she could make was to cry. Because she could not even sleep. Every new sensation was like a stabbing feeling. She could feel something moving inside her, churning her insides, and it felt like a white dragon trying to claw its way out of her tiny stomach. At least, she thought, in the next couple of hours, or days, or some sort of arbitrary time she had been put into, there were only 4 auras that was a constant in her somewhat new life. And she could not see clearly what or who they were, so she could only describe what she felt. 1 was black like thunder, 2 was purple like coarse lavender, 3 was a small pinch of blue salt, and, currently the only aura that did not make her uncomfortable, was the 4th, a dark velvet red silk. To her relief, red was almost always with her, constantly calming down the white dragon within her. And she had a feeling that these 4 colors were actually people, but her blurry vision still couldn't tell for sure. But whatever or whoever it was, she decided that she really liked red. The clan celebration lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. The whole compound was open for the whole village to visit, and that week they received many gifts and visits from the other clans and ninjas in Konoha. Sasuke was brought out for everyone to see, for even at 5 days old Sasuke was a social baby. Mitsuki on the other hand was kept inside 99% of the time. The crowd in particular made her cry the loudest. Ironic because the party was made this big in the first place to celebrate her. And on the final day of the festivity, 7 days after Sasuke and Mitsuki were born, Itachi concluded that yes, something was really, curiously wrong with his baby sister. It was a hot summer night and he and his mother had just finished putting the twins to sleep. Sasuke was easy, not picky, because he would stay calm with whoever was holding him, but a 3 days attempt at trying to get Mitsuki to stop crying made them realize that Itachi was the only one who could put her to sleep. He was the first to realize that something was off with how Mitsuki handled chakra, because she noticed everything. She noticed when it was him holding her as opposed to his parents. She noticed when Sasuke was in the room with her by the way she curiously tilted her head towards him. She noticed when strangers were downstairs in the house during the celebration because she would immediately start crying even though Itachi was right there with her. It was curious, to say the least, and the next morning his parents finally brought Mitsuki to the hospital again. Itachi's suspicion was true, there was something wrong with Mitsuki, chakra hypersensitivity. Yono-sensei had called it after he checked and diagnosed her again, his sister still crying since she woke up that morning. She feels every single chakra around and inside her very strongly. Is something wrong with her chakra coil? Were his father's first words. Oh, no, don't worry, Uchiha-sama. Her chakra coil is intact and healthy. She is just hypersensitive to the chakra in her own body. But the chakra is making her uncomfortable. Is there anything we can do? His mother asked with a worried tone. The answer, Itachi found out, was given by the Hokage's wife. Uzumaki Kushina, his mother's good friend, offered to put a small suppressing seal on Mitsuki later that afternoon during her weekly visit. It's not a big seal, though it would prevent her from using chakra while she has it. So she can't be a ninja? Itachi asked, rocking his sister who was still crying in his arms. She can be a ninja if she wants to. Of course, just the seal would need to be removed when she's older, and then it might be difficult for her to mold and expel chakra. But it should be easier to train her when she's a bit older. Then anything, Kushina, his mother said tiredly, she won't stop crying, we don't know what to do. His father nodded, seemingly supportive of the decision for now. The seal was quickly set up in the evening on the small of her back and the jutsu was performed by the Hokage under Kushina's supervision, because Kushina was too pregnant to perform it herself. His sister finally stopped crying, his mother and Sasuke could finally sleep peacefully, and his father seemed satisfied. But at that point in time Itachi was still clueless as to how his father felt about all this, about the surprise birth of his sister and her condition. And it was only on the next night, 9 days after Sasuke and Mitsuki were born, that Itachi found out. It was a peaceful night of the Hanabi festival despite the sound of fireworks in the distance, the most relaxing Itachi had had in his life, even though his family didn't get to celebrate the festival due to the 2 newborns in the house. The twins had been put to bed. Mitsuki was much calmer, way less restless after Hokage-sama put the suppressing seal on her. Itachi, Fugaku, and Makoto sat at the dining table with hot evening tea in front of them, finally rid of talking about the twins, war, clans, and was talking about the fireworks, of all things. Maybe next year they could finally watch the festival because mother wanted to bring the twins to see firework. His father respectfully nodded and his inward child was excited until everything was cut into dead silence in the middle of his father's sentence, I was thinking maybe we could. The fireworks stopped and everything was still when Fugaku's entire body snapped up, his eyes snapped open, his entire body went rigid and lips slightly parted in rage and worry and his eyes were more alert than Itachi had ever seen them before. All warning signals blared up in Itachi's mind as he tried to listen, and it was gone. It was quiet. Too quiet because 2 hums had become one as only the hum from Sasuke's chakra was left, Mitsuki's usual chaotic haphazard one was gone, and so it was dead silent as Itachi's eyes widened out of their sockets. He was staring at his father for direction, but faster than he had ever seen his father moved in his life. Fugaku was in front of the twins' room in a second, door half slammed open and his eyes searched in fear of his daughter having been taken or worse. He was relieved beyond measure but apprehensive, because she was lying there and asleep, and she was there. But that night was warmer than usual, and with the help of the seal she was now calmer, and had more control of the chakra inside of her own body, so she had unconsciously suppressed her chakra to help cool herself down, as shinobis were wont to do to adjust their body temperatures, to the point of being almost undetected by both Itachi and his father from downstairs. And when Makoto finally realized that her daughter's chakra had stopped humming, she followed her eldest son and found her daughter in the arms of her husband, channeling his own chakra slowly, gently, little by little to cool her down and get her chakra to hum again because it was scaring all 3 of them to death. The long night was finally over. Makoto could finally sleep throughout the night without her daughter waking her up crying every hour, and, seeing his father taking Mitsuki to sleep in his and mother's room that night, Itachi realized that his father was more confused of his daughter than he had ever been of anything else in this life. But perhaps he had wanted his daughter more than anything in this life, too. The next 2 months went much, much better. With the seal, Mitsuki did not cry as much, and she seemed to be calmer, and happier when she was awake, looking around curiously in the rare moments she wasn't asleep. Because now that she didn't feel everything around her so intensely and painfully anymore, Mitsuki slept like the dead. She thought. Her mind was too developed for this new body of hers, so she thought it needed the rest. And it wasn't like her family could complain. Itachi could once again resume his training without having to calm Mitsuki down every hour, and his parents could sleep more and go back to work like normal. With the seal, Mitsuki even turned out to be a very not fussy baby. Sasuke was a bit more whiny. When he was hungry or tired he would cry. But Mitsuki just made small sounds, and didn't do anything else. She was a calm baby that slept a lot. So, the family thought that the seal saved them a lot of sleepless night. That was until that October night. Makoto knew something was going to happen tomorrow, because her friend Kushina was expecting, and she was one of the only people who knew what her friend contained. Their whole clan was stationed on high alert to evacuate the villagers in case anything happened, but so far everything was quiet, and no one felt anything wrong. That was until the crying began. It was like 3 months ago all over again. That entire night until the next day, Mitsuki would not stop crying. Even Itachi holding her did not do anything. Makoto stayed awake the entire time trying to appease her. Fugaku even came home early from his station at the Konoha police force that day to check on her, but nothing seemed to be able to make her stop crying, and she was crying and screaming louder and louder by the hour, even until the sun set again that day of October the 10th. Should we take her to the hospital? Makoto asked worriedly, carrying Sasuke who was now also crying listening to his sister, while Itachi tried desperately to calm Mitsuki down. But Fugaku shook his head, looking at the distant Hokage mountain from their inner garden. Not today. Today we have to make do with what we. And then it started. First they didn't feel anything from the outside, only that Mitsuki's chakra had recoiled and was suppressed terribly, terribly low until it disappeared, much like that night of the fireworks, only worse, because now none of them could feel her chakra even though she was right there in front of them. And then she stopped crying. Mitsuki-chan. Itachi tried calling her in his arms, but while she usually already recognized people calling her name, now she was dead quiet, and dead still in his arms. Mitsuki. His father took her quickly from him, channeling strong soothing chakra onto her, but even then Itachi felt nothing. Father. I can't feel her. Then they heard the roar. It was coming from the outside, the terrible bright crimson chakra that was, and Mitsuki was sure that she was dying. The aura felt like it was stabbing her alive. She could hear people screaming around her, but much like her eyes, her ears at this stage could not differentiate any sound she heard. And at this point she didn't want to hear or see anything, she just wanted to disappear. But Itachi could see, and in all his life, he swore he had never seen his father panicked. Mitsuki-chan. Mitsuki. This is your mom, please, Mitsuki-chan. It's okay. It's okay. His mother was now crying, talking frantically to his sister as his brother cried even louder and father flared his chakra harder and channeled it into her. But even Itachi could hear it too. Not just her chakra completely suppressed, her heart was beating slower and slower. She was getting colder and colder to the touch. Her blood was flowing even slower. Anata, please, we have to do. Itachi, hold her. To his surprise, his father then commanded. He obliged immediately, taking her gently and now trying to channel his own calming chakra into her. I'm going to the front lines. That thing needs to be killed before it kills her. But Danzo and Lord Third ordered the clan to stay back. Screw Danzo and Lord Third, was all his father yelled before he flickered away faster than Itachi could respond. It turned out his father ordered the whole Uchiha clan to fight the nine-tailed fox, that was extracted forcefully during Kushina's childbirth. And with his father's eyes controlling the beast, the fight ended faster than it could become a tragedy. They lost one person from the clan, thankfully someone Itachi didn't know closely, and the village lost a few other Jonins who was also on the front line. The biggest loss was Kushina herself who died from the tailed beast extraction, and later from performing the 8 trigram seal on the 9 tails. His mother mourned, and the village mourned. It was a shame, Itachi thought. He was starting to like Aunt Kushina. But other than that everyone came back alive, the Hokage and their newborn son, and Fugaku, though the fight costed him his left arm. But his father didn't seem to care. Because he said, the Hokage and most importantly his sister was still alive. She stopped crying about 1 hour after Kushina was forced to seal the beast inside her own newborn son and passed away, and slowly Mitsuki stopped suppressing her chakra. Little did he know, that in this timeline, his sister's existence had caused a big ripple that will change the course of their entire future. As the weeks passed Mitsuki slept less. And as she slept less and could experience the world around her clearer, she was starting to notice things. At first she thought she had just been reborn into a different country, or the same country but in a different era. But then she noticed the especially odd attires of the people around her, and the way that sometimes people just appeared in front of her and then disappeared, just like that, in a puff of smoke. She thought that this wasn't normal. Then one day when her eyes were starting to be able to see farther away than what was just immediately in front of her, she saw the rocky mountain from her back garden with 4 familiar yet unfamiliar faces on it. Then she thought, she knew this place. This place existed in her previous life too. Only, in her previous life, this place was supposed to be fictional. In her previous life she was just a watcher, a faraway observer of this universe. And then as her ears started to catch up to her eyes' development, she noticed even more things. 1. She slightly understood the language they spoke. It was a language she learned a long time ago in her previous life. 2. She could start to put faces and names together with the way they referred to themselves in front of her. The beautiful woman with the purple lavender aura, or chakra, as she thought they were calling this thing, was her mother in this life. She was as gentle and kind as her mother in her previous life, which hurt Mitsuki when she thought about it, so she tried not to. The rough-looking man with the black chakra was her father. The first thing she noticed was that he only had one arm. He was quiet and he was around less, but he held her always with such gentle care with his one arm. She almost felt guilty about being suspicious of him when she first learned he was her father. Her father in her previous life was a terrible, terrible man. The red velvet soothing chakra, her favorite one, felt like contentment. He referred to himself as her Nisan, her older brother. He was there half the time and half not, and from what she could understand it was because he was going to some sort of school. But what little time he had at home he spent only with her and the other infant that was always near her. The other infant in the room with the blue chakra, who was laughing half the time and crying the other half when he was awake, she learned slowly was her twin brother. From the first time she caught herself in the mirror and came to terms with the fact that yes, that infant looking back at her was really her, she tried to see the resemblance with her twin brother. Though she supposed it was difficult to see it on chubby faces of babies. And at first she didn't really think much of this faraway supposedly fictional life as more than just a very realistic dream. She spent most of her days sleeping, and when awake observing and listening to the world around her. Her eyes in particular felt nothing like in her previous life, she never remembered ever being able to see this clearly. Everything was sharper and more vibrant, and she could almost see every nook and cranny and the chakra and colors surrounding the world around her. But then as she slept less, observed more, and her consciousness grew, she started to notice the lone fan symbol that decorated most of her belongings and the streets outside of her house. She started to notice that these faces, the faces of her family in this life, were familiar. She had seen these faces before. And then she heard. Her mother was changing her twin brother next to her. She usually always pretended to sleep or look away during these embarrassing instances, but this time she was listening. Now you feel better, right, Sasuke-kun? Sasuke-kun. Sasuke. And her eyes snapped open. She looked next to her at her twin brother, laughing as mother cuddled and tickled him. And all at once she saw everything. In her previous life, she was just a faraway observer of this world. She didn't even know most of the story of this world, only small bits of information of what happened here and there. But now this was her life. And this person, Sasuke, Uchiha Sasuke, was her twin brother. She raked her brain trying to remember if Sasuke was ever supposed to have any sort of sister in the story that was originally intended. Her mother, in this life, that was, noticed her watching and came to her next. Everything okay, Mitsuki-chan. Mitsuki was her name. She tried to remember if the name sounded familiar. It didn't, and after trying to remember what she could about this universe from her previous life, she came to one very terrifying conclusion. She had been reborn as Uchiha Mitsuki, twin sister of Uchiha Sasuke, one of the main characters of a supposedly fictional world of ninjas. And she definitely, for sure, was not supposed to be here. In her days, she tried to watch Sasuke to decide how fast or slow she was supposed to be developing, because she thought being a full-grown adult in an infant's body had to be something abnormal even in a world full of people breathing fireballs. Though most of the time she thought it was good that she didn't have to pretend. Her muscles felt incredibly weak even just to support her own weight, her eyes and ears were still developing, and her tongue felt way too big for her small mouth that she couldn't utter one coherent sound. But her mind was that of a fully functioning adult. And being trapped in this body that was too small for her brain was exhausting and boring at the same time, so she spent her days sleeping and observing, rinse and repeat. She spent all of her days with Sasuke, who was very cuddly, and tried to communicate with her. But she couldn't understand him, and she was partially still terrified of her new reality, so most of the time she just let Sasuke crawl towards her and hug her and pull her hair and do all the talking, with his incoherent gurgles and babbles. Their mother, Uchiha Makoto, was also almost always there, and for such a delicate woman she had a very frightening strength. She carried both of them on each arm every time she went outside. And she went outside every day to visit other people who looked similar to them and share the same dark-colored chakra. She supposed these were all her relatives, they were all Uchihas around her. The Uchiha compound was huge, too big and colorful and complicated for her eyes to comprehend at this age, and what her mother did every day as she visited different houses with both of them in her arms she also didn't understand. But she tried to soak in what she could, names of some people around her and their relations to her. What and who her immediate neighbors were. What was going on around her in that immediate instance. When they were not outside, her mother let Sasuke and her roam freely inside their living room in some sort of a playpen, or in a similar setup in the inner garden when the weather was warm enough. Their only entertainment were some stuffed toys and each other. Sasuke adored her. She could feel it in the way he seemed exceptionally attached to her even when they already spent most of the days together. Mi-cha was his first word, and the first time Sasuke exclaimed that during dinner as he reached out his fat baby arms towards her, the rest of the table turned quiet. She didn't know how to react. Because on the one hand, she was surprised that his first word had been her name, yet on the other hand, she wasn't sure if he was slow or fast because she didn't know if babies that age were supposed to be talking yet. Though the rest of the table were watching in awe and silence, as if expecting some sort of response from her, however ridiculous that may have sounded to her ears. So she nodded at her twin brother and struggled to mutter slowly with that too fat tongue of hers, Sasu. Sasuke squealed happily though she doubted he even understood what was going on and went back to playing with his bottle. Her mother gasped audibly, and she didn't know if it was because of joy or surprise and suspicion. 10 months. They are almost 1, it's probably about time, she heard her father said quietly, with a hint of proudness in his voice. And she heard her older brother agreeing in excitement. The only thing she did was put her pacifier back in her mouth in relief and observed more. Her niece-san, Itachi, was the third person she saw the most after Sasuke and her mother. After she had some sense of day and night time, she realized that Itachi left every morning and returned sometime in the afternoon. And at home his favorite thing to do was sit with his siblings inside the playpen. Play was Sasuke's third word after mi-cha and ma, and it was his favorite phrase at this age. He was always saying it to her or Itachi. And what do you want to play today, Sasuke? Play. Sasuke repeated again as he took his favorite dinosaur plushie and crawled towards Itachi to drop it in his lap. Itachi nodded fondly at him and took the plushie, waving it in front of Sasuke, effectively distracting him. His attention then turned to her. And you, Mitsuki-chan? What do you want to play today? She thought it was awkward, because she could understand what he was saying, and she thought from the way her brother was looking at her, it was as if he knew that she knew what he was saying. Yet at the same time she still couldn't form the words or sentences, and she didn't really want to pretend to be a toddler and play like Sasuke. So her only response was to look back at the large picture book open on the floor in front of her to try and guess what the words on the pages mean. She was very fast in her development, she knew that. After all, there was a full grown-up mind inside her body. All she hoped was that her parents and Itachi and her other relatives wouldn't notice it. But the Uchiha eyes missed nothing, because Makoto saw everything. She saw how Mitsuki was able to pull herself up on the shelf to take the building blocks Sasuke was whining at, or how she was able to say simple things as if she actually understood what was going on around her. No, when Sasuke was asking for a particularly dangerous toy, or stop, when he tried to climb out of the playpen. Her daughter acted older than her age, and if Itachi didn't also develop almost as quickly as her, Makoto would have been a little bit more worried. She was just happy Sasuke seemed to be developing in a much more normal pace. She thought she had at least one child that would stay a child longer. Fugaku was someone Mitsuki saw the least in her family. And she thought he was a man of not many words. She remembered some bits from her previous life as a faraway observer, where this man was portrayed as a strict father who heavily favored their older brother. But here, in this world, her father seemed nothing like the man she remembered from that distant memory. Nor was he like her own father from the other life. Sometimes when he raised his lone hand she almost wanted to recoil instinctively out of habit, or when he was sitting in front of her and then suddenly stood up she wanted to clench her eyes shut out of fear. It took a great deal of effort and more time for her to keep it in her mind that no, this father was nothing like the father she had before. In fact, Fugaku handled her with nothing but gentleness. Out of all her family, he was the most attentive to all her movements, and from Makoto's stories and his own observations he knew Mitsuki was developing quicker than expected. So every time he was home he tried to watch her, and was always prepared to catch her in case Mitsuki might try things like reaching up to a table higher than her reach that might potentially injure herself. He also noticed her jumpiness around him, how she tensed whenever he tried to reach out to her or lift her up. He wasn't sure why it was as if his own daughter was afraid of him. His only thought was maybe his chakra felt more intimidating to her sensitivity than that of his wife's or Itachi's. So he always tried to move slower around her and always in her vision, and whenever he touched her he always made sure to do it with such gentle care that she always knew what to expect. He thought his daughter was the most magnificent thing he had ever seen in this world. Not even Itachi's equally fast development was this fascinating. Itachi had always been a quick learner. But his daughter was different. She didn't need to be shown or taught what to do. It was as if she understood things on her own. Maybe it was just her naturally observing nature. Though from observing her he also observed his second son more, and Sasuke's innocence and childlike behavior that was more normal for his age than what Fugaku experienced with Itachi and Mitsuki gave him a sort of comfort and a breath of fresh air. In their own ways all his children were special, and he would never give them up for the world, nor let the world lay a finger on any of them, of this he swore. A little afterwards there was some sort of gathering and celebration going around her, and from the gifts and affections she received from multiple people that day she gathered it was supposed to be her and Sasuke's first birthday. She was born right after midnight and so her birthday was actually one day after Sasuke's. She found this out from one of the conversations the elders had with her father on that day. But since they were still young their birthdays will be celebrated together till they come of age. She didn't mind it, in fact she very much preferred it. The various colors and sounds and chakras around her on the very few times a large gathering like this happened was quick to overwhelm her. Sasuke on the other hand, was the pride of their parents on gatherings like this. He was a very social baby who was happy around crowd, and her mother was proud to carry him around and show him to the guests each time. She meanwhile was left alone in the playpen in the living room, only with Itachi watching her, because her parents noticed her aversion towards crowd, and of this she was grateful. It was on this day that she met another person that would come to be another big part of her life. She noticed his warm emerald chakra before he even entered the living room, and when he came in to see her, his round face, big eyes and curly hair were the first things she noticed about him. The second thing was that his first reaction upon seeing her was to lift her up into the air and twirl her around, laughing all the way. Itachi, this is your sister. I've only seen her when she was born, but look at her now. She is so cute. This shocked her, not only because his bright emerald chakra was very overwhelming when it's this close, but also because cuddling and squealing, cute, was usually people's reaction to Sasuke, not to her who was a quiet baby who barely smiled or laughed. Shisui, put her down. Itachi was quick to stand up the moment his friend picked her up, scowling at him. She doesn't like that. She reached out to Itachi on instinct, because compared to the vibrant chakra Shisui had, Itachi's velvety red one felt familiar and far more comfortable. Itachi immediately took her from Shisui with a gentle reassuring smile. Shisui pulled a face at them. Oh come on, Itachi. We were just playing. Right, little princess. Her only response was to pout at him. The rest of the evening everyone left her. Most of the guests came in, took one look at her not being as delightful and entertaining as her twin brother and went back to Sasuke and her parents. The only time she had to leave the living room was when Hokage-sama and his son came and Itachi took her to the front door to greet them. He was a man who looked familiar from her previous life as a faraway observer, with blonde hair and a striking yellow chakra. But her only thought was that at this point in time she didn't think he was supposed to still be alive. Though after her initial surprise at seeing the Hokage, who she noticed more was his son he was carrying. He had an orange chakra as bright as his father, but what caught her attention was that familiar terrifying crimson tinge she definitely knew, and the whisker marks on his cheeks. He was smiling at everyone and babbling in that baby voice of his, wiggling around to try to escape his father's strong hold on him. This, she thought, this was the most important person in this universe in his timeline. Hokage-sama, we're grateful you can make time on your busy schedule to come today, her mother greeted. Lord Forth's response was to smile sheepishly and shook his head. Makoto, you've been cooking us dinner, helping me take care of Naruto, and Fugaku has been taking care of some of my cases so I can spend more time with my son. You and your family have been very helpful to me ever since Kushina passed last year. The least I could do is show up when you give us an invitation. We're happy you're here, Minato, Fugaku said quietly. Tell us if there's more we can do to help. Oh no, I might actually take you up on that offer, Minato smiled, scratching the back of his neck. Naruto is becoming more and more of a handful these days. I don't think I can take him with me to work anymore. Even the genin teams assigned to him so far can't seem to handle him. Take him to us when you go to work, I'll gladly take care of him for you, Makoto smiled at him. There's also Sasuke-kun and Mitsuki-chan, so Naruto-kun will have friends to play with. And that was the start of her seeing more and more of Uzumaki Naruto the next few days. Hi, was the first word the ball of energy shouted at her and Sasuke in their playpen. And as a barely 1-year-old he had spoken more words than she had ever uttered in her entire life here. Granted, most of them were just baby gibberish, though she heard the words, Naruto, and, live it, repeated a lot of times in his blabbing. She was wary around him because of that terrifying crimson chakra he carried, though it wasn't as bad as the first time she remembered it. At first Naruto was trying to approach her and Sasuke equally, but since at this age Sasuke was much more playful and outgoing, the two got along perfectly and quickly forgot about her, playing plush toy soldiers, large building blocks, and wrestling each other. She mostly ignored them, except on times she thought the baby wrestle was getting too heated. She usually tried to stop it by pulling her brother away from the blonde, and then the play continued. Her days continued just like that. Mother stopped taking her and Sasuke out, now they get daily visits from the relatives instead. And as they got bigger and talked and moved more, her need to sleep to accommodate her taxing mental state slowly decreased. This came with a problem. She now had too much time awake on her hands and became bored out of her mind. Sasuke and Naruto had each other and were happy playing every day, but she was disinterested in them except to make sure they were playing safe. And otherwise she herself had nothing to do. She tried to learn the language more, picking up books in the living room, now that the playpen had been dismantled and they were free to roam around the whole room, that had more words than her baby picture books, but she understood none of the words she had seen so far. Makoto noticed and bought her more picture books and tried to read with her on the rare days she wasn't talking to the relatives in the room next door, but soon the words on the picture books became too easy for her, and the words in other books too hard. It was a tricky situation to be in. Itachi started noticing her more introverted tendencies, too. When before he tried to play with her and Sasuke equally after he came home from the ninja academy, now he mostly left Sasuke to play with Naruto and sat to offer her puzzle blocks or read with her. She was shy around Itachi, because in her previous life as an observer she remembered the tragedy of the Uchihas and Itachi's role in it. But so far in this universe, this place seemed like nothing she remembered from watching it before, and her older brother was a very gentle person. He spoke every word with care, and he also taught her better than her mother because where Makoto treated her like the toddler she was supposed to be, Itachi taught her more words than what she was supposed to know. By the time they were two, Sasuke was still making very short phrases, Naruto was still only gurgling nonsense ending with, live it, but with her tongue that no longer felt too big and clumsy for her mouth now she could say almost full sentences. But she tried to keep it to herself, because she still used Sasuke as a reference for normal development. But one night she made a mistake of staying up later past their bedtime. Sasuke was already taken to their room, but her mother saw her still looking at a children's book she gifted her last week and let Mitsuki stay in the living room longer. It was still hard to actually read the words, but Itachi had been reading with her more, and it was easier to remember what he said. Killing a bull by straightening its horn was what the caption of the picture said, an old proverb about something like a remedy being worse than the disease, and she tried to say it out loud the way Itachi had read it out to her. Though her father, who she thought had retreated to the inner garden with Itachi, had heard her. Mitsuki. She was surprised at her name being called, and quickly closed the book and turned to look at her father. Dad, can you say that again? She tilted her head, pretending not to have understood. But her father was having none of it. You know I heard you. He frowned at her. He was surprised when for once Mitsuki acted like a child and actually pouted back at him. Ni-san reads for me. And what did he say? Killing a bull by straightening its horn. It was a convoluted sentence, too complicated for children her age to be able to say, but he masked his surprise by walking towards her and nodding towards the closed book in her hand. Is that the book? She nodded at him. Can you read it? She shook her head honestly. A little bit only. He said nothing else afterwards and only took her to bed, and so she didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. But her father said nothing else after that day, and only wordlessly came home one day with more picture books for her with harder words. So she decided it was perhaps okay to be speaking earlier than Sasuke after all. The year that she turned 2 and Itachi turned 7, her big brother apparently graduated the academy after only 1 year, a big pride to her father and her clan. Though this also meant that he was now an active genin who was at home less than before. When he was there he came home later than usual, only arriving at 4 or 5 in the afternoon. Sometimes he came home later, and sometimes he didn't come home for days. Though sometimes he also had days at once where he had time off, and it was during these times, after she turned 3, that she and Itachi became closer. Turning 3 was a lot more fun time for Sasuke and Naruto, who could now run with their little feet and spent most of their time running around the inner garden. It was now also easier for her to understand everyone around her, and respond accordingly. Sasuke had also started talking in full sentences, so being able to hold some sort of a conversation with him on the days they were left alone was also more engaging for her. Though he still spent most of his time with Naruto, who at this age had become his best friend and spent more time at their house than at his own because his father had a lot of things to do as the Hokage. She didn't mind this at all. At this age it was easier for her to read, and she had been reading more and more difficult words. She decided that reading was the most perfect way to kill time and boredom when being reborn as a toddler. The books in her previous world had never been this exciting. She read about the history of their world, and what ninjas could do. She was starting to realize that this was not fiction anymore, this was her reality now. Maybe someday she would be able to breathe fire too. And besides, she always thought, she wasn't supposed to be here. Sasuke was never meant to have her always nearby, so it would be easier if he never got too attached to her. But Itachi, though generally not being home a lot during the day, was very interested in her on the times that he was home. On the days he was in the village only doing easy D-rank missions, he came straight home before dinner and sat with her, watching her read or offering to read her books. She usually accepted, but as she got older she got more and more cautious around Itachi. Because for some reasons she couldn't understand, he seemed to have taken a liking to her and paid attention to her more than the rest of the family, even Sasuke. He was attentive and took it upon himself to be as involved in her hobby of reading as possible, reading to her words that were beyond her years and teaching her as much as possible. One day he came home and presented to her a very nice gift. A big writing book for children that looked very expensive. For me, of course, he looked confused when she didn't do anything other than stare at the book and ask the strange question, who else would it be for, Mitsuki-chan? She didn't feel worthy of Itachi's attention. In her last life, her mother was the only one who cared enough for her. She had no one else and didn't think she was supposed to have anyone else. Even as an observer she remembered from her last life that Sasuke used to yearn Itachi's rare attention, and now her older brother was giving it to her in abundance. But here Sasuke was happy. He doted on her as his twin sister, and adored Itachi as the talented older brother, but in this world, at this age, he loved Naruto and playing with Naruto more than anything else. Sure, the two boys always ran to Itachi shouting at him to play with us every day when Itachi came home, but when Itachi only smiled and offered them a maybe next time, Sasuke didn't seem to mind and only shrugged before returning to play with Naruto again. Yet she still felt guilty about Itachi, choosing to sit with her and paying attention to her instead of Sasuke, or anyone else for that matter. You didn't have to, was all she could say as she looked away from him and the book. And the response got him even more confused. But I want to. He tilted his head and knitted his eyebrows as he prodded the book towards her again. After some time, she still didn't look at him, but took the book anyway. Thank you very much, she said clearly and gave him a small bow, before sitting back down and quietly opening her new shiny writing book. A few days afterwards Itachi came home and sat with her on the inner garden patio as usual, though now quieter after her strange reaction to what he thought was a gift she should be more excited about. She had been preoccupied with the writing book he got her in the past few days, and managed to get through the words almost flawlessly. But today it looked like she was struggling with a particularly complicated character. Do you need help with that word, Mitsuki-chan? Itachi asked with a gentle smile. Mitsuki looked up from the page and quickly looked away again, shaking her head. Itachi was always very affectionate, she realized. He patted her head when she did a good job copying his sentence, rubbed her back, put her on his lap and guided her hand to follow what he was reading. And then he bought her this big expensive wonderful book. But she never returned the affection. Most of the time she only bowed her head slightly, saying thank you and moving on. As the days passed by and she grew older, no matter how fascinating this new world of hers was, her only thought was, I don't belong here. Ni-san should play with Sasuke, was all she said quietly after some time, still not taking her eyes off the page in front of her, the hard words still unwritten. Ah, Itachi seemed to realize something then, and then looked at Sasuke playing tag with Naruto, and his mother watching them both from under the cherry blossom tree drinking tea, but Sasuke is playing with Naruto-kun. Ni-san should join, Sasuke likes Ni-san. Itachi gave her a small smile then. Mitsuki-chan, he said, almost politely, do you not like me? She was surprised at the question, which made her look up at him, and upon seeing his usual gentle smile for her she quickly looked away again. It's not that she disliked him. No, in fact, she really liked him. He had taught her a lot of things, he looked after her, and his chakra was her most favorite thing in this world. He even bought her an expensive gift she could really use. So, I do, she answered honestly. It's just that, Ni-san, I'm not supposed to be here. Huh, I'm not supposed to be in Konoha. Because she didn't know the word for exist, or be born, yet. Mom should only have Ni-san and Sasuke-kun. I'm not supposed to be here. He furrowed his eyebrows then, looking genuinely confused. Why would you say that? She didn't know what to answer him. Maybe she had even said too much at this point. So she just looked up at him briefly one last time and shrugged, I'm not supposed to be here. And then she continued staring at her book. The next day when he got home, Itachi did something he never did before. He asked her to go on a walk with him. But Sasuke-kun. Nay, Mitsuki-chan, your Oni-san wants to go with you, said Nara Yoshino. The play group was getting bigger now with Shikamaru and Choji who she just officially met today joining Sasuke and Naruto in her backyard, and their mothers joining Makoto as the women made some sort of a garden picnic now that the weather was getting warmer. Sasuke seemed to be having so much fun with the bigger group now too, so she didn't really have the heart to ask him to stop playing and take a walk with them. So she agreed to go to the park alone with Itachi. They were sitting on a bench looking at passers-by and children playing in the park, her feet dangling on the edge of the seat, and she was getting anxious with each passing silence. Mitsuki, Itachi finally said, quietly, after some time, I had a dream the other day. She looked up at him, waiting for him to continue. To her surprise he wasn't looking at her but at the children playing in front of them. That you didn't exist, that it was just me and Sasuke, as you said yesterday. And the dream didn't end well. She was surprised, and as Itachi looked at her to gauge her reaction she immediately looked away. Then he sighed and continued again, it was a much sadder world. With much more awful circumstances. A lot of people wouldn't be here anymore. In fact, our entire family wasn't here anymore at the end of the dream, and Sasuke and I were not happy. She thought this was strange, and he was definitely watching his words not to say too much to her who was barely a child. But his dreams sounded suspiciously like the Uchiha clan from her previous world as an observer. So, Imouto, Itachi started again, this time more cheerful. She was still surprised by his dream, but she looked at him this time when he called her. You said you're not supposed to exist, but I just want to say that I'm glad you are born. He grinned at her then, and it was the first time she saw him with a wide toothy grin. His smile turned gentler as her lips parted and her eyes turned wider, and then to her surprise he slowly raised his hand and poked two of his fingers gently on her forehead. And maybe someday, you'll be glad, too. She wanted to cry. She didn't experience much of this kind of genuine affection in her previous life. Didn't think she deserved it in this life where she wasn't even supposed to exist. But the way Itachi tried so hard to talk to her, and be close enough to get through to her completely touched her. She wasn't sure why he chose her like this in this life. Maybe he saw her getting left behind by Sasuke who preferred Naruto and felt sorry for her. Or maybe in her aloneness he saw himself in her. Or maybe he genuinely liked her too. But maybe, she should also try to make the best of this life, since she was already here anyway. She looked ahead, avoiding Itachi's eyes as she tried so hard not to cry, even though her eyes were already moist. She knew Itachi knew she was crying, but Itachi was understanding and didn't fuss over it and only put one hand gently on her head. She sobbed lightly as he patted her head patiently, looking ahead and not at her. After a while she calmed down enough, and it was calm but peaceful, the only sound coming from the children playing in front of them and the passerbyers walking past them. Ni-san, she decided to say quietly after some time, can we go get Dango? Itachi looked visibly surprised by her request, but he looked genuinely happy. Of course, he quickly said. It was one thing they had in common. When Sasuke and their parents weren't particularly fond of sweets, the two of them were. When their father came home from work sometimes he bought dango or sweet rice cake, just for the two of them. Afterwards they even stopped at the bookstore. Itachi bought her more writing books, not as expensive as before but still a lot, and she didn't complain. And when they were walking home, it was the first time she tried to get close to him. He was carrying all things they bought that afternoon with one hand and kept the hand on her side free. She noticed he always did this on the rare days the family went out together, but usually she politely declined when he actually offered his hand. Sasuke was naturally affectionate. When out walking with Makoto he always held his mother's hand. When Itachi was there he always asked Itachi to carry him. But Mitsuki was almost always polite and distant. Even when her mother offered her hand, she only held it out of courtesy and let it go as soon as possible. But now she reached out and tentatively held his hand while walking. He looked visibly surprised and didn't even try to hide it. He looked at her with wide eyes and mouth open wide. She was looking ahead, her cheeks turning pink as she blushed with the big gesture she just made. But from the corner of her eyes she caught him smiling. And he held her hand back, tightly, as they walked back slowly into the compound. Afterwards Mitsuki became more open. She was still quiet, and she still preferred to observe things first from a safe distance, but she actually tried to be more receptive to her parents' and brother's affections. After a couple days of observing her twin brother and his new friends in playing, to everyone's surprise, she actually asked to join in. Mitsuki-chan, you want to play with us? Naruto was the first one to answer when she asked if she could join them, and his overly shocked tone would have hurt and discouraged her if not for his big excited smile, and so apprehensively she nodded her affirmative. What's wrong, Mitsuki-chan? Sasuke on the other hand decided to ask worriedly. Is everything okay? His innocence and genuine worry was adorable. Though they were barely just 2 hours apart, she noticed Sasuke tended to act like the big brother around her. He had that overly protective tendency towards her, dare she say even more than Itachi. He knew Mitsuki preferred quiet and didn't really like playing, and he respected that. Even as a playful child Sasuke was raised very politely. So every time Naruto disturbed her reading time he was usually the first to scold his best friend and tell him to leave his sister alone. So she tried to give him a small smile and a shrug, I'm just bored of reading. Is it okay if I play with you? And his genuine bright smile afterwards touched her and made her almost want to cry again. Of course, they had a lot of different games, from tag to fort to hide and seek, but for her adult mind those were still too childish for her. But in her new routine she forced herself to play with them for at least 2 rounds before she would politely excuse herself and go back to her books. Naruto and Sasuke had always adored her, and had always wanted to play with her before, and now that she actually started to join them, it was like they became even more attached to her. Sasuke talked more to her about his day in their shared room before he went to sleep, and Naruto constantly brought new toy puzzles he hated but knew she preferred or food to share with her every day when his father dropped him off. In return she got to know them and their behaviors better, and also Choji's and Shikamaru's who were new to the group. But she found out she got exceptionally closer to Shikamaru, who even as a child was less active than the other 3 and even her. Can I just sit here with you? After some weeks, when she excused herself early from playing to read on the patio, he decided to join her, looking at her politely as he gestured towards the other side of the kotatsu table. I'm tired. She looked at the Nara curiously but otherwise only nodded. To her surprise he didn't go under the kotatsu like what she expected, but just took off his sandals and laid down on the patio, both his arms behind his head. What are you doing? She decided to ask after he stayed quiet like that for a few minutes, and almost apologized when she realized his eyes were closed. But he quickly peeked his eyes back open and looked at her. Oh, sorry. I was watching the clouds but I almost fell asleep. Watching the clouds. He sighed quietly, but sat up afterwards and finally got under the kotatsu across from her, nodding. Yes, I like watching the clouds. It feels so peaceful and free. Is that weird? No, she quickly answered, and then blinked, but then knitted her eyebrows, but is it not boring? Watching the clouds. He raised his eyebrows at her. Never. Oh. Then are you very tired? Huh, you almost fell asleep earlier. She blinked at him. Are you very tired? He was looking at her curiously before putting one hand under his chin and looking up. I suppose playing has been pretty tiring. Oh, was all she said again, and then she quietly went back to her writing book and he went back to lie down with his legs under the kotatsu and watch the clouds. The next few weeks went on like that, filled with playing, practicing writing, and now watching the clouds with Shikamaru during her breaks. Before her niece-san came home and taught her more words, the other children got picked up home for dinner, and her father came home. Her niece-san said nothing, but she could feel Itachi's proud gaze the first time he saw her willingly play with the other children. And throughout, she caught him watching them with an odd sort of fascination. In her new friends group, she could relate the most with Shikamaru, who at this young age she thought might have an even older habit than she did. Otherwise she got used to her new routine fairly quickly and peacefully like that. Her new monotony was only broken once in a while, when Itachi or her father went on a mission that lasted more than a day, when Itachi decided to train with Shisui instead of going home straight after his missions, or when her mother had to run clan errands and they were watched by Shikamaru's and Choji's moms instead, or all 3 mothers stayed in the garden with them for picnic. It was also during one of those picnic days that she noticed Naruto was always not as cheerful as usual when all the mothers got together, wistfully watching her and Shikamaru's and Choji's mothers having picnic under the cherry blossom in the garden. Then she realized that though loud and hyperactive most of the time, the blonde had his own soft side, too. So, don't be sad, Naruto-kun, she murmured to him quietly, hidden by the noise of Sasuke and Choji bantering nearby, my mother is your mother, too. That resulted in Naruto looking at her in surprise, him tearing up, and her gentle smile quickly turning into panic as he started to cry loudly and tackled her into a big snotty hug. The mothers paused their conversation briefly, curiously, and Sasuke quickly pulled his best friend away from her, annoyed but slightly worried. Nothing, Naruto sniffled when her brother and the group asked him what was wrong, just I like your sister and I'm going to marry her one day. Sasuke was now very annoyed as he lightly smacked the blonde across the head, saying, don't be stupid. And the mothers laughed out loud from their spot. Mitsuki retreated back into the shadows, her face bright red now still with shock and embarrassment. She liked Naruto, she really did. From this group of her brother's friends, Naruto was the one she knew the longest, and the one other than her brother who she knew also cared for her deeply. But she had to admit that the blonde really needed to learn the art of thinking before speaking sometimes. That summer day, sometime in the next few weeks, the seemingly similar everyday life she had been having was interrupted, because on that day Choji was sick, Naruto was spending time with his father who took the day off, Makoto needed to go to the elders' house until late evening, and Itachi was free from missions for 3 days because he just got back from a week-long C rank in a nearby town. For the first time, Makoto asked Itachi to bring Sasuke and Mitsuki to the Nara's place instead, because Yoshino offered to cook dinner for all of them while Makoto had to talk with the elders. Shikamaru greeted them boredly at the door, but from having spent more time around him in the past few weeks she noticed the excited twinge in his eyes as he let them into the Nara head house. "Come Sasuke, I'll show you my action figures collection," was the first thing he said proudly to them after they took off their shoes and Shikamaru led them towards the kitchen. Sasuke then nodded excitedly and followed his friend to another room. Sasuke and Shikamaru were very different people, but in a way she realized that her brother shared some similarities with Shikamaru, like how they were both usually the ones who made sure the games Naruto came up with for the group were actually logical, or how they both loved action figures for some reason she couldn't understand. Yoshino, who was still stirring something inside a big pot in the kitchen, smiled at Itachi and Mitsuki when she noticed them standing near the entryway. "Come in, you two. How was your day? Dinner is still not ready yet, but go to the garden out the back. The weather is warm today and you can wait there. This will only take a bit more." So they went outside to the Nara's back garden, and found Nara Shikaku sitting on the patio in front of a shogi board. "Well, if it isn't Fugaku's first son and only daughter," he smiled politely when they opened the sliding door. "Shikaku-san," Itachi said politely, bowing his head. She bowed low following her brother's lead. "Nice to meet you, Nara-sama. I'm Uchiha Mitsuki. Shikaku's fine, kiddo." Shikaku almost huffed in amusement at the young child's extreme politeness, "and I know who you are. We've met before when you were a baby, and Shikamaru's told me all about you." "Oh," she was surprised at this, and almost reluctantly asked, "What did he say?" "That you're the prettiest friend he has." He winked, and then laughed out loud when she turned red at that statement. "Don't tell him I told you that." She looked at Itachi for help, but the trader's response was just to chuckle at her expression. May I play?" she said shyly, gesturing at the shogi board in front of Shikaku, mostly just wanting to change the subject. That got him to stop laughing. He looked at her surprised, because at this age even Shikamaru hadn't been taught to play shogi yet. "You know how to play?" She shook her head. "No, but I can learn." Shikaku looked at Itachi questioningly, but the boy wasn't looking at him. He was only smiling fondly at his little sister. "He's completely smitten." The older man sighed, then gestured across the table from him. "All right, take a seat." She took a seat in front of him, and Itachi sat directly beside her. He explained the rules slowly once, and told her that they could play now and she could ask again if she forgot. She nodded once and they started playing, but she never asked him to repeat the rules again. Itachi was silent as he watched the game. After a few moves Shikaku realized he was obviously winning, the child obviously too young to play shogi. Though he wasn't winning as hard as he expected against a barely 4-year-old. "You do realize I can just take your gold general from here and then check your king?" he asked when she made a particularly bad move, and then showed her what he meant. Yes, to his surprise she nodded, "But I think it's okay if you take my gold general in this case, because then I can position my king to a safer place here and move my rook to attack after this." That statement shocked Shikaku more than what he showed on his face. After a few more moves, Shikaku won. Mitsuki childishly pouted when she realized she had been bested, but he was genuinely impressed. She had way more foresight and played much more logically than what he had expected a child her age to. She excused herself with a big smile then to go to the washroom, and Shikaku watched her go quietly before turning to Itachi when she had closed the sliding door back behind her. "Your sister is smart," he said, watching the boy's reaction carefully. But Itachi only nodded with a proud smile, still looking at the board in front of him. "She is way smarter than children her age," Shikaku was cautious as he said this, watching Itachi closely from the corner of his eyes. But again her brother only hummed thoughtfully and shrugged, she doesn't really act like children her age. Mitsuki came back at that moment and sat back down at the table, for once actually looking like a child as she smiled excitedly at the two of them. I'm back, and then, does Shikamaru-kun know how to play? He watches me sometimes but he's not really interested. But he might change his mind if I tell him you know how to play now. Oh, she blinked and nodded. Okay, let's play again. After that day their usual routine of playing in the Uchiha compound continued again, except this time, true to Shikaku's words, Shikamaru learned how to play shogi and now never showed up at their house without a shogi board. They spent her breaks playing shogi now. And on the rare days mother couldn't make dinner, Choji's mom or Yoshino always made dinner for the children, and she tried to spend these rare visits to the Nara house to learn shogi from Shikaku. Shikaku had taken quite a liking to the girl. She was smart and very well behaved, and she wasn't loud nor whiny like how girls her age usually were. And the next time he met Fugaku at work he made sure to tell him exactly that. Her father only nodded when he heard, but otherwise also said nothing nor give any discernible reaction as to what he made of this. She and Itachi, meanwhile, had gotten even closer over the next few months. She was no longer shy or cautious around him, she found that she didn't need to be. However, her brother was supposed to be like in that other universe, whatever his reason was for doing what he did, this brother of hers loved her like nothing else, more than anyone else had ever loved her before. Even her mother's care, her father's watchful proud gaze, and Sasuke's pure adoration were nothing compared to Itachi's constant attention that he gave her whenever he could. She didn't want to get attached in this world, but she couldn't help it. She loved Itachi. She was starting to love her parents and Sasuke too. How could she not? Her parents took care of her, an adult in a baby's body, needing to be changed, to be fed, to be watched constantly, and it was hard not to love Sasuke who looked at her only with trust like she could never do anything wrong in this life. And it was definitely hard not to love Itachi who showered her with gentle, unequivocal affection. Then one day, Itachi left for a few days for another C rank with his team. It was a prestigious mission, because Itachi's team had been exceptional this past few months. They were chosen as part of the Fire Daimyo's convoy during his annual trip to Konoha. Yet it was also supposed to be short and simple. Escort the daimyo into the village, protect him for the next 2 days, and then escort him back to where his own guard team will take him back home. On the day Itachi was supposed to return, she figured he was running late. She was starting to get attached and used to Itachi always being there at least every night, so when he had been gone for 3 days she was starting to miss him. It was almost midnight, she saw the clock on the wall. Sasuke was asleep, and she almost jumped in excitement when she felt that familiar red velvet chakra entering her house downstairs. She quietly got off her bed and went downstairs, hoping to greet Itachi at the door with the pretense of not being able to sleep if her mother scolded her. "Ni-san, welcome ho." But then she noticed the situation. Her parents were at the door with him, talking in hushed voices, and when she caught glimpse of her brother she was almost scared. He was looking down, his eyes empty like she had never seen them before, his shoulders slumped with thick dirt and splatters of blood on his shirt. Fugaku noticed her first. He turned to look at her as if to scold her for being up, but Makoto was the one who spoke. "Mitsuki-chan," she said, "what's wrong? You can't sleep." She couldn't take her eyes away from her brother, who she didn't think even realized she was there. He looked completely out of it, and she was getting scared and worried for him. So without looking away from him she only nodded. "Go wait in the kitchen, I'll make you some warm milk after this then maybe you can go back to sleep," her mother said gently. She complied and as she waited her mind went wild. What happened? Was everything okay? Was Itachi okay? After about 10 more minutes of hushed conversation she couldn't hear, she felt the red silky chakra of her brother moved slowly towards the inner courtyard, and she quickly jumped off her seat to follow him without waiting for her mom. "Ni-san," she tried to call out gently. She realized he went to the courtyard to take off and clean his dirty equipments and weapons. His back was to her, and it froze the moment he heard her voice behind him. He then slowly looked back at her, and the sight before her shook her to the core and she audibly drew a breath, and it wasn't because both his eyes were wide and glowing red. But it was because Itachi was crying. It was the first time in this life she had ever seen him cried, and that sight terrified her to her very core. "Ni-san, what's wrong?" she said, quickly moving towards his side. "Your eyes." "Mitsuki," he said slowly, his voice so sad it broke her heart. He seemed cautious when she drew near, so she stopped a couple steps before she reached him. "Mitsuki, I'm sorry." "Sorry? Why?" she wanted to ask, but she got the sense that he wasn't apologizing to her. Then he turned away from her again, both his hands reaching up towards his face, covering both his eyes as he choked and sobbed, and she panicked because she didn't know what to do. She was terribly worried, but from the way it looked he wasn't injured, which made her came to the conclusion that someone else was injured during the mission, and it must have shocked and hurt him. She had read about their family's bloodline limit before, the Sharingan, a powerful ocular ability unique to their family. It explained why her eyes felt so much clearer than how it was in her previous life. But she also thought this was a double-edged sword because the Sharingan usually only activated in emotional distress. And she didn't know what happened in his mission, but she could see her brother was hurting nonetheless. Something happened that made him activated the Sharingan for the first time. She still wasn't sure what to do, but Itachi so far had always been there for her. He was the first one who made her feel like it's okay to be in this world where she's not supposed to exist, who made her want to be in this world. So she came slowly to his side, and gently, carefully, put both of her arms around his head. He was shocked, and upon realizing what she was doing immediately choked again, moving both his arms to hug her back tightly, and he buried his head on her tiny shoulder and cried louder. They stayed like that for a long time afterwards, before her mother, considerate as she was, only came to them quietly after Itachi stopped crying with 2 glasses of warm milk on a tray for the both of them. The next few days Itachi stayed in bed and ate alone, and Mitsuki respected his desire for privacy. The Hokage gave him 2 weeks off in light of recent events, and Sasuke was concerned but he was also more sensitive than he looked, so the twins also mostly kept to themselves during the first week, continuing with their usual group playing every day in the inner garden. On the 5th day Itachi finally came down for breakfast, and he looked much better. He shared a look with their father and Mitsuki thought yesterday the two of them were out and spent the day together, and her father must have made him feel better. That day Itachi finally smiled again. It was small and weak, but it was a smile nonetheless and she was happy. Then the next week he did not once leave Mitsuki or Sasuke's sides, except when they slept. Going to the park was a rare thing that she and Itachi did once in a while ever since that fateful day she realized it was okay for her to live in this world, but that next week Itachi asked her to walk with him to the park almost every single afternoon after she was done playing with the others. Sometimes Sasuke also came, but he still preferred to stay home and play with his friends. On that day it was just the two of them. And they were sitting on their usual bench at the park, once again observing the children in front of them playing ninja. She thought, ninja, which was basically a more intense version of tag combined with hide and seek, was now also Sasuke and Naruto's favorite game. And that, combined with Itachi awakening his Sharingan last week, got her to think now. Ni-san, she started hesitantly, slowly, Itachi listening to her curiously, how to become ninja. He looked surprised, because as a baby Mitsuki was oversensitive to chakra until Uzumaki Kushina had to put a chakra repressing seal on her. He never really thought about it afterwards, but now that she asked, he thought he didn't know if Mitsuki could even be a ninja, or if it would be safe for her to. And when Itachi didn't know what to say, he usually said facts, you have to enter the ninja academy and graduate into a genin. Oh, she said simply, but he knew he wasn't answering her real question, how do I become a ninja? Do you want to be a ninja, Mitsuki-chan? She looked at him. All Uchihas are ninja. This was not true. In fact, more than half of the Uchihas nowadays were not shinobis at all. And he knew Mitsuki knew that, their mother's job was to maintain the welfare of their clan after all, and Makoto took the twins to visit the relatives a lot of times before. But he understood the real implication behind her sentence. Their family in particular were all ninjas. And she wanted to be one, too. I see. Itachi decided he needed to try and bring up the subject with their father somehow. The next day it surprised him that his mother brought up the topic first before he even thought about what to say. His parents were drinking evening tea in the large kotatsu table in their living room after the twins were asleep, and Itachi was reading on a couch in the corner, when his mom suddenly said, "Mitsuki wants to become a kunoichi." Itachi looked up from his scroll in surprise. His mother was holding her tea, looking at his father. But Fugaku didn't even look away from the paper he was reading. He didn't look surprised nor angry nor showing any other emotions to indicate how he was feeling regarding the matter like how Itachi had hoped. He only grunted his acknowledgement, "We'll have to talk to Minato." Makoto nodded at the response, now with a small smile. "Then I'll bring her to Hokage-sama tomorrow. Can I come too?" Both looked surprised when they realized that Itachi was paying attention. Then Fugaku looked up from the paper. "Hokage-sama gave me the 2 weeks off anyway, so I'm still free tomorrow. May I please come with you, mother?" Fugaku and Makoto looked at each other at that. "Why?" was what his father said. "Because," he knitted his eyebrows in confusion at the question, "she's my sister. I want to know, too." His parents looked at each other again, before Fugaku finally sighed, and nodded his assent. The next day Makoto approached the topic swiftly with Mitsuki over breakfast after their father had left for work. "Mitsuki-chan, wanna take a walk with mother and Ni-san today?" Mitsuki was surprised at the request directed specifically at her, then she looked at Itachi and suddenly she realized what was going on. Oh, can I come, too?" Sasuke asked his mother excitedly before Mitsuki slowly nodded at her mother. Makoto smiled brightly at her youngest son. "Sure, Sasuke-kun. But Yoshino-san, Shikamaru-kun, and Naruto-kun wanted to come play today, and I heard Yoshino-san bought Shikamaru-kun a lot of new toys for you guys to play with. Are you sure you want to come with us?" He blinked at the statement, and after a couple seconds considering it he smiled sheepishly, "I'll stay home then." "Okay. That way I can leave the house to your care." Makoto again smiled sweetly at him. Itachi watched the smart interaction. His mother had simultaneously made Sasuke want to stay at home and think it was his idea. Sometimes he forgot how terrifyingly cunning his mother could be. Makoto opened the door to the Hokage's office after knocking 3 times at the appointed time, smiling at the Hokage. "Hokage-sama, thank you for meeting us on such short notice," she said amicably, Itachi and Mitsuki bowing deeply behind her. "Makoto, please don't worry about it. What can I do for you today?" Minato returned her smile just as brightly, and he directed them to sit on the couch in the middle of the room. The 3 sat together across the tea table, himself on the other side. Once they were seated, Mitsuki slowly let go of Itachi's hand she had unconsciously been holding tightly the whole way there. "I understand you're very busy, so we'll get to the point," her mother said, still with a small smile but now with that no-nonsense official business tone of hers. "Mitsuki-chan wants to be a kunoichi." Minato looked taken aback, but Itachi saw that Mitsuki on the other hand did not look any bit surprised. As if she already knew exactly that was what they were here for. Minato knitted his eyebrows. "We had to suppress her chakra when she was born because her own chakra distressed her. Right now with the seal she won't be able to mold chakra at all. If she wants to be a ninja we'll have to release the suppression seal," he said, and upon not getting any reactions from Makoto other than a simple nod he turned his attention to the child in question. "Mitsuki-chan," he called, "could you come to me for a bit? I want to take a look at the seal if it's okay with you." Itachi thought, Mitsuki definitely knew the purpose of this visit, because she approached Minato and immediately took off her shirt and showed him her back. She even came prepared with chest bindings covering her upper torso. Minato and Makoto both looked surprised. They didn't know Mitsuki knew about the seal on her back, but somehow she did. For her part, it wasn't hard to put 2 and 2 together after observing the strange mark on the small of her back that was throbbing on the first few days after she was born. Around the same time the chakras around her stopped bothering her as much. The Hokage cleared his throat before looking at the seal, running one of his fingers on the small writing and the 3 marks on the circle around it. The seal looked exactly the same as when he gave it to her the week after she was born, and the memory hurt him because it reminded him of Kushina, who was guiding him at the time he gave her the seal. So he inwardly shook his head and asked the girl, Mitsuki-chan, are you sure? Yes, Hokage-sama, was the girl's only response. So he looked at her mother and older brother. Do you know if she could still sense chakra? Yes, Makoto answered without pausing. Itachi looked at his mother surprised. Itachi knew from watching Mitsuki grew up that his Imouto despite the seal was still very much attuned to the chakra around her, but he supposed if he knew this, his parents would have known it even sooner. Minato nodded. If I remember correctly, her 4th birthday is in 2 months. The seal weakens each year after it was given, so I suggest we try to undo the seal 1 week after her birthday, so around 70 days from now. And after more planning and explanation they left with Mitsuki feeling more excited yet nervous than she remembered ever feeling. 2 months passed very quickly for her, even Itachi's and then her and Sasuke's birthdays seemed to fly by in a daze. As usual, they celebrated her and Sasuke's birthday together because they were not yet of age, even though she was technically born 1 day after him. On that summer day she was dressed in a pretty dark purple heavy yukata with butterfly prints on it, and throughout the day the clan came and congratulated her and her twin brother, gifting her clothes and jewelry and her brother training weapons as per custom. During the evening her family prepared a small celebration, and like each year only her closer friends and family members came to the evening party, like Shisui and her aunt and uncles. Minato and Naruto came, Minato gifting her a beginner book on sealing techniques after hearing that she liked to read, and also so she learned a bit more about seals before they unlock hers next week. Naruto gave her and Sasuke big green goggles identical to the one he always bore. Then Shikaku, Yoshino, and Shikamaru came with Choji, Shikaku and Yoshino gifting her an expensive shogi set and Choji giving them all food and an apology from his parents who couldn't come that day due to their own clan meeting. Here, I know you like this stuffed rabbit, I've seen you eyeing it at my house before, Shikamaru said as he handed her a plush bunny tied with a big green ribbon, and she blinked as she took the plushie. Eyeing it might be a bit of a stretch, she only said once that she thought the bunny in his room looked cute but she was surprised he remembered it anyway, so she smiled and thanked him. He nodded and gave Sasuke a new set of action figures. After the guests left was the time for her own family to give them their own gifts. Her mother gave them both new clothings, Ni-san gave her even more books and gave Sasuke his old training weapons. Dad gave Sasuke his old tanto, of which Sasuke was beyond excited even though at this age they were still not trained in anything ninja related yet. But then her father asked her to follow him to his office. She followed him quietly, and stood respectfully in front of his desk, not touching nor looking at anything longer than she should, because she knew usually her father was a private person regarding his office and his job. Fugaku then took a small flat box out of the desk drawer and handed it to her. The box looked old. It was black and heavy for its a bit larger than a hand-sized dimension, with a silky casing and a small Uchiha symbol proudly presented on the center. Open it, her father said simply, and she nodded at him before carefully turning the clip on the box and lifting up the cover. Inside it were 2 Uchiha fans, both shaped and colored like her clan's symbol, and upon further inspection she realized that the edges of the fans were sharp, the fans were actually blades. It's a family heirloom, her father said this proudly, and nodded in approval at her odd expression. It's been passed down through generations. But there hadn't been any girls born in our family for so long, and the weapon was deemed too feminine by many. It is now yours. Thank you, father, I love it, she said genuinely with a small bow, and there was a hint of a smile on her father's face as he put one hand on her head and led them outside again. She hadn't received any training at this age, but her family seemed supportive so far of her wanting to become a ninja and to remove the seal on her back, so she thought this weapon will come in handy to survive in this world one day. Then night came, and she and Sasuke were changed into their pajamas before both retreated into their shared bedroom. Happy birthday, Sasuke-kun, she said with a small shy smile as the door closed behind them, and she reached up towards the cupboard where she had kept her gift for him. It was an action figure which, according to Shikamaru, Sasuke liked and wanted, and she had asked her mother for a small allowance to buy him the small statue, to which her mother had given her with a big smile. Sasuke gasped, and after laughing happily, he stunned her by throwing his arms at her and hugging her tightly. Thank you so much, Mitsuki-chan. I love it, he said with a toothy grin. She smiled back at him and awkwardly lifted her arms to return the hug. She knew Sasuke was a touchy and affectionate child, but usually those affections were directed mostly at their mother and brother, because she was always very reserved. But Sasuke had been more open with her this past year, so she supposed she should prepare for more hugs coming from her twin brother. Then to her surprise, he ran to the table next to his small bed and pulled out a packet, handing it to her. "Happy birthday to Mitsuki-chan," he said. Her eyes were wide as she took and opened the packet, finding a silk red hair ribbon inside of it. She thought the choice of gift was curious, but at the same time not really, because she always knew Sasuke was actually more sensitive than he seemed. "I know your hair has been getting longer and annoying lately, so I thought this will be useful for you," he explained with a sheepish smile. She smiled gratefully at him and took the ribbon, using it to tie her hair into a small half ponytail. Sasuke grinned after she finished, and then his mouth opened into a small "oh" before his eyes widened. "Mitsuki-chan," he said excitedly, "you look so pretty." She blushed from the comment and immediately looked away, embarrassed. But after her heart calmed down, she felt her cheeks pulled up into a happy smile. Thank you, Sasuke-kun. Then the next week came. A large circle made up of characters Mitsuki couldn't read had been drawn with chakra-conducive ink on the floor around her, and inside the circle a triangle with her right in the middle, and Hokage-sama's assistant Hitaki Kakashi, Yono-sensei who delivered her as a baby, and another nin who Minato introduced as Yamanaka Inoichi on each corner of the triangle. Minato himself was kneeling right behind her, both his hands tracing the seal on her exposed lower back. The whole family, except Sasuke who Makoto dropped at Yoshino's place that morning, were there, standing on the edge of the room inside the private medical wing of the Konoha hospital, and a team of medic nin were ready on another side outside of the circle. The seal has 3 locks and a main seal. We will need to unlock the 3 emblems one by one before unlocking the main seal, so you will feel 4 waves of chakra in total, the Hokage explained to the room, then slightly knitted his eyebrows. It will be painful each time, Mitsuki-chan. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? It's not too late to back out. But her only response was, I'm sure, Hokage-sama. So Minato sighed and closed his eyes, and when he opened them again he looked at her father, who nodded in confirmation, and he asked her again gently, then are you ready? Yes, Hokage-sama. So he nodded at the 3 kneeling at each corner of the triangle, before he and Kakashi stood up and made a series of hand seals in tandem. Then Minato put his hands on her shoulders. And though he did it gently, a first wave of pain came. It was not bad. It felt like very heavy toy trucks were rolled over her back from her shoulders towards the small on her back and then pushed her there, but it was shocking. From her kneeling position she fell forward, both her hands snapping out to support her weight. Then after a few seconds the dull pain stayed right there on the small of her back, but another bout of nausea came, because she started seeing very vibrant colors around her, and breathing became more difficult because of the seemingly sudden heatwave blowing at her. She realized all of this was just chakra. The locks on the seal was made to strengthen the seal, and now that one of them was unlocked, the suppressing seal on her weakened, and so she could feel the chakra around and inside her more clearly. How are you doing, Mitsuki-chan? She heard the Hokage called worriedly from his position still behind her, though his voice now sounded more dampened and far away than before. I'm okay, she said, but everyone could hear her breathing turned heavier, and she did not get up from her position kneeling with both her hands in front of her on the floor, supporting her. The Hokage continued. This time Yono-sensei on another edge of the triangle stood up and made another series of hand seals together with Minato before the latter once again touched 2 fingers on the back of her neck this time. And this time, she shouted. Mitsuki-chan. Makoto called worriedly, and Itachi almost jumped at his sister instinctively, seeing her in pain like that, but his father's hand on his shoulder kept him frozen on his spot outside of the circle. Mitsuki thought. It was like her whole body was either on fire or submerged in ice or electrocuted in water. She was breathing very hard because it was as if she was suffocating on both hot and cold air. She saw and tasted colors everywhere. The air felt heavy, pressing from all sides on her skin. Hokage-sama, her mother called out worriedly, can't we unlock the 3rd lock and the main seal another day? It seems very overwhelming for her. But the Hokage shook his head and furrowed his eyebrows. I'm sorry, Makoto. The longer we wait, the more painful it's going to be for her. Fugaku's face was impassive, the only sign that he was just as worried as his wife was his lone hand gripping tighter at Itachi's shoulder. Mitsuki-chan, how are you feeling? This time Inoichi Yamanaka asked worriedly from his corner of the triangle. But then again her only response was, I'm okay. Even though no one believed her, she was breathing raggedly and heavily and she was gritting her teeth all throughout her response. Minato then moved to his position to open the final seal. We'll pause for one more minute. Then I'm going to open the third lock and then immediately the main seal. Get ready for it. Then after a second thought, he looked up towards her family, and hesitantly asked, is there anyone whose chakra Mitsuki is somewhat comfortable with? I need someone to hold her still for the next step in case she moves out of position. Itachi wasted no time. In an instant he was kneeling next to her, both his hands on her shoulders. No one complained, because since she was born his chakra was the only one who could calm her and make her stop crying. But this time his touch felt like it almost burned. She recognized the velvety chakra of his, he was instinctively trying to flare his usual soothing chakra at her, but this time it felt like his chakra was screaming and clawing at her. Itachi-kun, don't flare your chakra, Minato warned him gently, shaking his head. She's feeling everything very intensely right now. So with great difficulty Itachi tried to calm and dampen his chakra. And after a while Mitsuki's breathing sounded a bit calmer, and her shoulders relaxed if just a tiny bit, and so the Hokage nodded towards Inoichi who stood on the final corner of the triangle. Alright Mitsuki, get ready. As soon as he said it, Mitsuki screamed. She expected it to be at least slow, but no. It came instantly like a bulldozer crashing through the door. It felt suddenly like all of her bones were crushed simultaneously from all sides of her body. So many stimuli were ringing and blasting at her. She was hot and cold, her eyes were too bright and too dark, it was too loud yet she could hear nothing at the same time. She would have fallen and thrown up and curled into a ball from the sheer pain if it wasn't for Itachi holding her still, and she could feel the chakras around the room flaring in varying intensity in fear, warning, and worry, which in turn made it worse. She clenched her eyes shut from the splitting headache, and it took her some time after she could compartmentalize things going on around her better to realize that the blood-curdling scream was coming from her. Mother looked terrified. She thought when she could finally see past the swaying colors and vibrations, even Dad seemed like he was worried to death. Almost done. Hokage-sama's voice sounded only like a faraway ring even though he was right behind her. And then she physically knew the moment the main seal opened because suddenly she could feel it, that swirl of the white dragon, deep in her core, waking up roaring and trying to claw its way to get out. And suddenly every sensation around her was intensified further. The pain was now 10 times worse. She could feel herself crying now. It was a kind of pain like she never experienced before. She thought in her previous life she had endured a lot of pain when her father beat her or forced her to watch him beat her mother, and she thought that would translate to a higher pain tolerance in this life, but she was wrong. It was never like this before. Never did the pain come from outside and inside her own body, outside and inside her own mind at the same time. Then just when she thought things couldn't get any worse it did. She hallucinated a very vivid vision where she relived that day. The day her father from that other life came home dead drunk and beat her mother senseless. Then he turned at her for trying to pull him away, the broken glass bottle ready in his hand, before in one swift move her mother's head shattered in front of her eyes as she took the blow meant for her. How she watched her mother died in an instant, rocked her lifeless body screaming and crying for her to come back as her father yelled how it was all her fault. And she thought she had this memory buried far, far away deep within that she would never remember it again, but here it was one more time, clearly right in front of her as if she was experiencing it for the first time. Then faster than she saw it the vision was gone, replaced by her new world, her new life, and her new family standing helplessly worried, watching her with wide terrified eyes. Everything around her was crashing and burning, but the worst of all, she thought, was her eyes. It was like her eyeballs were burning in a kind of sensory overload both from the world and from her own chakra inside her own head. And as she looked around, she thought she could see all of the chakra around her. In fact, not just the chakra. She could see everything. Every movement was enhanced, like everything was moving in a ridiculous sort of slow motion. Her head was still throbbing fast like someone was pounding it with a giant hammer, but everything was moving very comically slowly. And her eyes hurt so unbelievably much that it didn't matter if she closed or opened them because she just wanted to claw them both out of their sockets and go blind just to stop the sheer intensity of the pain. She looked around in panic, helpless and furiously looking for help from someone, anyone, because it felt like she was dying. She saw Itachi. She could see his chakra clearly now, red around him flaring loudly trying to envelope her, and his chakra felt just as helpless as he looked at her, not knowing what to do. But the moment he saw her looking at him, the moment he saw her eyes, he froze. Then he slowly turned to his father for direction, but his father was just as equally shocked as he watched. Then her eyes throbbed again. But this time it was much, much worse, like someone just swung a chainsaw and split her whole head in two. She blacked out instantly, Itachi and Minato catching her before she hit the ground. The three nins who performed the unsealing with Minato immediately stood up, performed another series of hand seals, before the medic nins on the other side of the room quickly rushed towards Mitsuki with a rolling hospital bed and set it up inside the circle. Then they all saw a tangible sort of a bubble-like barrier forming up from the circle on the ground and covering everyone inside the circle. This bubble is a protective chakra barrier. It can be weakened slowly over the course of the next few weeks. In the meantime, the team inside the barrier now will take care of her. We should take this time for people to come in slowly so she can familiarize herself with chakra of people she's close with, before we remove the barrier after she's used to this new feeling. Itachi heard the Hokage's explanation, and understood it, but all he could think at that moment was 4 years old. Mitsuki was only 4. That was far too young for the Sharingan. That's even younger than Itachi himself. What had they done to her? I apologize, Fugaku, Minato said on the edge of the circle towards her father on the other side of the barrier. I didn't expect it to be too stressful for her that way. Otherwise I would have suggested we waited until she's older. I'm sorry. But Fugaku was still looking at his daughter, now all control of his expression gone as shock was all that was visible on his person. So in return Makoto was the one who answered, tentatively. No one expected that, Hokage-sama, it's okay. Thank you for your help. Minato nodded, but he still watched Fugaku worriedly. Should I add it to her files? Makoto was about to answer for him again, but this time Fugaku came back to his senses and spoke first. Not yet, he said, his eyes closing for a few seconds before opening again, and when Minato caught sight of them they already looked impassive like their usual state, the only indication of his troubled mind now just the stiff line on his still tense jaw. She might not even remember it happened. No one else except those in this room should know about it for now, Minato. And Minato quickly nodded his understanding to his friend. When she woke up, Itachi was next to her. The moment he saw her eyes slowly opening and her breathing through the oxygen mask quickened, he almost jumped up from his chair and had to restrain his chakra from flaring too much in relief. Sasuke and Mother, who were sitting still outside of the protective bubble they had set up in her room, also quickly stood up the moment they noticed Mitsuki was moving. She felt suffocated, claustrophobic, and feverish. The moment she opened her eyes she was seeing too many colors overlaying her view, all hanging around the room like a thick sort of fog. And she wasn't sure if the oxygen mask strapped to her face was making it easier or harder for her to breathe. All she knew was the air around her felt heavy and all her limbs felt much more weighty than she had ever remembered them to be, even from her previous adult life. Itachi was holding her hand carefully, she realized after a while, and he was looking at her with that fear and worry in his eyes that made her want to hug him. But everything felt so difficult to move, so she just tried to tighten her hand on his. Mitsuki-chan, how are you feeling? Yono-sensei asked from her other side, checking on the IV drop attached to her. The medical team next to him started to move around checking her vitals and various machines attached on her. Her throat felt dry, and it was so difficult to talk, but she tried anyway and managed to rasp out a small, "I'm okay," at him. Though obviously they all knew better. Yono-sensei frowned at her, but said nothing else regarding the matter. Instead he told her amicably, "Your mother and brother have been waiting here worried. They want to see you. It was then that she saw Mother and Sasuke standing on the other side of the room beyond a sort of invisible barrier she could see only because of her heightened chakra perception currently. And she realized Yono-sensei left the implication unsaid. It will hurt when they step into the circle. She thought she didn't need to be told that anyway. She experienced that awful pain of being exposed to the chakras around her at this state firsthand. But she saw Sasuke's worried face as he clutched his shirt, barely stopping himself from throwing himself at her, and steeled her resolve. She looked back at Yono-sensei and weakly nodded. The only indication that she was scared was her holding Itachi's hand even tighter. She could feel them the moment they stepped inside the barrier. Like when one was stuck inside a tiny cabin during a very cold snowstorm with a hypothermia, and then suddenly the door to the freezing windy outside was opened wide and two other people who were very cold to the touch were suddenly shoved into the cabin with them. Her breath hitched as she tried to get used to the new feeling of the two familiar yet now very imposing chakras walking slowly towards her. Sasuke approached her first, his movement small and tentative as if he was almost scared, clutching her stuffed rabbit in his arms as Itachi made space for him to stand next to her. Mitsuki-chan, he sounded hesitant, his eyebrows knitted in worry, are you feeling better? Mom and Ni-san told me you're sick. I'm okay, she repeated with her still raspy voice. Sasuke didn't look like he believed her, so very slowly, because her muscle still felt very tight and stiff, she let go of Itachi's hand and took her twin brother's. See. She tried to lift their joint hands but only managed to move it a bit. Then she forced out a meek smile, okay. At that Itachi smiled at them gently and took a few steps back to give them more privacy. Sasuke managed a small smile and nodded. I brought you your favorite plush. He seemed to remember the stuffed toy he was carrying then and gently put it next to her head. Her smile widened at that. And then her mother was on her other side. Mitsuki-chan, how are you feeling? Better. She knew better than to try and lie or appear strong to Makoto. Her mother nodded at her and gently pulled the blanket higher to cover her chest. The next few days Sasuke didn't leave her side. Itachi went back to his missions, and their mother needed to go back to her clan duties, but Sasuke never left her hospital room, which she found odd because usually he had no problem leaving her to read on her own while he played with Naruto, Shikamaru and Choji. But she realized that ever since they were in the womb, the two never actually strayed away from each other's presence for a long enough time for it to actually be significant, the most probably only a few hours when she took a walk with Itachi or when Sasuke went to his friend's place to play without her. But according to Itachi, she had been unconscious for 2 days. It was the longest Sasuke had gone without seeing and touching her. Maybe he didn't know what the feeling was yet, but Sasuke was terrified of losing her. So the moment he was allowed inside the bubble, his mom said the Hokage made to protect his sick sister, he didn't leave her side. He stayed and did things he knew she enjoyed more. He played building blocks and puzzles with her, read books with her. He ate and slept next to her on the bed. Mother came every day to feed them breakfast or lunch and stayed the whole day when she came. Itachi came every day after his missions without fail, sometimes together with father, sometimes a few hours earlier, before the three then went home for the night. But there was always at least one Uchiha with them throughout the night, sleeping on the couch in the room. Sometimes it was mother herself, sometimes Itachi or Shisui, or one of their aunts or older cousins. Others also visited her the same time the protective bubble was weakened layer by layer. Choji and his parents, and then Shikamaru with his. It was like the cabin got colder and colder until she got used to the feeling somehow and felt warmer, but then the door was opened again when new people came in and the cycle repeated. Mitsuki-chan, how are you feeling? Shikamaru said one day on his second visit in the afternoon. This time he came alone with Choji without their parents, Makoto chaperoning them to her room. I'm getting better, she told him honestly. Your stuffed rabbit helped. She gestured then to the plushie Sasuke brought for her the first day she was awake. Shikamaru's eyes widened at the statement and his cheeks reddened as he looked away, nodding. Then Choji, one hand snacking on the pack of potato chips he brought, looked at his best friend and lifted his eyebrows. Shikamaru, he called, how come you call Mitsuki-chan, Mitsuki-chan, but you call Ino-chan only, Ino? That got a giggle out of Makoto, a confused look from Sasuke, and a blink from her. She knew Ino as the daughter of Inoichi and a friend of Shikamaru and Choji, but had never met her personally. An embarrassed noise came out of Shikamaru as he told Choji to eat his chips, Choji only grinning back at him and Makoto laughing as Sasuke asked his mother what was going on. She thought the feeling of a crowd around her nowadays usually gave her a headache, but this time she only smiled weakly at the interaction. More family came to visit her, but as far as she understood, her condition was being downplayed in public to make it not look like a big deal to prevent words of it getting out to wrong ears, so most of her relatives thought she just had a very bad flu. She felt sick most of the time during the day because the new world around her overwhelmed her, but she understood that this was the life she had to get used to now. She had to be able to live with this odd thing called chakra that was a big part of her new world. So she forced herself through it and tried her best to get used to the odd feeling of every unique chakra around her instead. She stayed in the hospital for about 3 weeks in total, and Naruto only visited her on her second last day, when the barrier was already very weakened, and she had felt strong enough to sit up and walk slowly around the room by herself. She could feel him even before he entered the room. She recognized the bright red menacing chakra that made her always want to puke. She almost screamed, who would bring this chakra to her now? But then she saw Naruto walked in, and then realized that the chakra was coming from him. Then she remembered from her last life as an observer what was inside of Naruto. So far this life seemed very different from that story she remembered, but she figured that this part about Naruto was still the same. He was still holding that fox demon inside of him with the bright crimson chakra that taunted her and made her want to cry. But for Naruto's sake she did not, and she did nothing other than smiled weakly at him from the bed as he nervously walked towards her, his father closely following behind him. Her own father came earlier to visit her today, and she realized this must be why. He was ready to act in case Naruto's chakra became too much for her. Mitsuki-chan, Naruto called, and the moment he stepped next to her and put his hand on hers it almost felt like it would burn her. But again she did nothing, and only held Sasuke's hand on her other side tighter. Hey, Naruto-kun, she said, weakly, because taking a breath now felt like the air was burning her lungs, so she was trying to conserve her breath. Naruto smiled slightly when she greeted him, then he stayed for another half an hour, telling her and Sasuke stories of the play days that they missed, and how he missed them terribly and hoped that Mitsuki would get well soon. He thought she was very sick. She stayed silent but nodded and smiled along with his stories. Then the next day Yono-sensei told her family that she could go home, but she still needed perhaps months to get used to living without the suppressing seal. They took the quickest and emptiest way back towards the compound, and feeling the vibrant, loud, and overwhelming world around her she decided she would most likely not be getting out of the house anytime soon.